The chamber was already tense, but when Pam Bondi's voice sliced through the air with a sudden, piercing stop talking, it felt as if the oxygen itself vanished. Cameras snapped in rapid fire, their flashes stuttering like lightning across a stormy sky. Staffers leaned toward one another with startled whispers. From the public gallery came a collective gasp that rose and fell like a single stunned heartbeat. For a moment, every pair of eyes locked on the woman at the center of the outburst, Representative Jasmine Crockett, waiting for her to flinch, to recoil, to give Bondi the satisfaction of a visible crack. But Crockett didn't move. Not a muscle. Her posture remained upright and steady, her gaze fixed forward with a quiet intensity that felt almost defiant. Under the unforgiving glare of the overhead lights, her stillness became its own kind of thunder. Where Bondi's outburst carried heat, Crockett radiated something far more disarming: absolute composure. The contrast was electric. One woman's voice trembled with entitlement, the other's silence spoke of unshakable resolve. 8 phones buzzed as reporters began typing frantic notes, each racing to capture the explosive moment that was already ricocheting across social media. The tension was palpable enough to taste like metal at the back of the tongue. Bondi's eyes flashed with a satisfaction that suggested she believed she had seized control of the narrative. After all, the former Attorney General had made a career out of rattling opponents. To her, this was another routine takedown. But the stillness in Crockett's face hinted at something Bondi had not anticipated. This wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of preparation, the coiled pause before a counter-strike. Around the room, lawmakers exchanged uneasy glances as if they sensed a shift in the air, a change invisible yet undeniable. No one, neither Bondi's allies nor the reporters scrambling for quotes, could predict what would happen next. Because in the next breath, with a single measured sentence, Jasmine Crockett was about to flip the entire narrative and send shockwaves far beyond the walls of this chamber. To understand the weight of Pam Bondi's eruption, you have to step back and see the powder keg that had been smoldering long before her voice cut through the chamber. For months, the GOP had grown bolder, fueled by a wave of overconfidence as the 2025 election season loomed. Conservative strategists whispered about a return to dominance, boasting that progressive momentum had peaked. Their rallies swelled with applause lines mocking diversity and sneering at the very idea that women of color could reshape American politics. Behind the smiles and polished speeches lay a strategy as old as power itself: dismiss, diminish, and, when that fails, silence. Jasmine Crockett represented everything that strategy feared. A young black congresswoman from Texas, she carried with her the lived reality of communities long ignored and voices long suppressed. Every committee hearing where she spoke, every policy fight she entered, was more than legislative work. It was a declaration that America's future would not be dictated by those clinging to the past. For the GOP, she was not just an opponent, she was a threat wrapped in poise and preparation. Pam Bondi, once celebrated as a tough-talking attorney general and now a reliable defender of conservative orthodoxy, had been watching Crockett's rise with increasing frustration. Bondi's allies saw her as the perfect foil, a seasoned veteran confronting a freshman congresswoman. But beneath the confident posture, they understood the stakes. If Crockett's voice could not be discredited, it might inspire a wave of young voters, immigrants, and everyday Americans to believe their own voices mattered. and that, for a party built on control of the narrative, was dangerous. The hearing itself was supposed to be routine, a debate over accountability measures and election safeguards. But to anyone paying attention, the subtext was unmistakable. Each procedural question, each pointed remark, was a proxy for a deeper battle over whose story would define America's next chapter. When Bondi finally snapped, shouting "Stop talking," across the chamber, it was more than a breach of decorum. It was a symbolic attempt to reassert the old order, to remind the room and the country of who had historically held the microphone. Yet the very ferocity of Bondi's interruption betrayed something else: fear. Fear that the days of unchallenged authority were slipping away. Fear that millions of viewers, watching live or on viral clips, would see a powerful woman of color refuse to be silenced. In that instant, the stakes leapt beyond party politics. Representation, dignity, and the right to speak truth to entrenched power were all on the line. Around the country, people who had endured their own moments of being talked over or dismissed felt the tension like a personal echo. This wasn't just about two women sparring in a committee room. It was about whether America's future would be shaped by inclusion or intimidation. And as the cameras rolled and the hashtags began to form, one thing became clear: what Jasmine Crockett unleashed next would travel far beyond Capitol Hill, carrying a message that no amount of shouting could drown out. To understand why Pam Bondi's shout carried such a sting, you have to know the polished image she spent years perfecting. To the casual viewer, Bondi looked every bit the seasoned stateswoman: tailored suits, crisp diction, a smile sharpened by endless TV hits. She entered national politics through the courtroom, rising from county prosecutor to Florida's Attorney General with a reputation for being tough on crime and fearless in the face of controversy. Network anchors loved her. She was telegenic, quotable, and always ready with a soundbite about law and order or protecting the American way. By the time she stepped onto the national stage as a Republican star, she was more than a politician, she was a brand. But behind the gleam of that brand lay a record far messier than the carefully lit television set suggested. During her tenure as Attorney General, Bondi talked relentlessly about accountability, yet she faced sharp criticism for accepting political donations from entities she later declined to investigate. She pledged fairness, yet advocacy groups documented patterns of selective enforcement that favored allies and punished opponents. When journalists pressed her for answers, she wrapped herself in the language of civility, polite deflections delivered with a camera-ready grin. To her supporters, she was a fearless defender of conservative values. To her critics, she was the embodiment of polished hypocrisy. Bondi's post, Attorney General years only deepened the contradictions. As a high-profile political commentator and legal analyst, she built a second career defending some of the GOP's most controversial figures. She spoke of unity while amplifying division. She called for respect while mocking those who dared challenge her worldview. And each time a scandal threatened to dent her standing, she emerged unscathed, buoyed by friendly media outlets and a party eager to showcase a woman who could parry criticism with practiced charm. Her message was clear: I am untouchable. That aura of invincibility wasn't accidental. Bondi cultivated it with the precision of a trial lawyer. Every public appearance was a performance controlled, measured, and meticulously rehearsed. Even when she sparred with opponents, she maintained a veneer of civility that made her jabs seem almost gracious. It was a powerful strategy: disarm with politeness, then slice with rhetoric. Over time, the performance became the person. Bondi came to believe that her composure and resume were shields against real challenge. But that confidence carried a quiet arrogance. Behind the flawless hair and lawyerly cadence was an expectation that rooms would defer, that opponents would flinch. She had sparred with governors, senators, and seasoned political operators and always emerged with her image intact. To Bondi, a freshman congresswoman from Texas should have been an easy opponent: a quick sound bite, a dismissive smile, and another viral clip proving her dominance. That's why, when she first heard Jasmine Crockett speak, Bondi's interruptions weren't just tactical. They were instinctive. She simply couldn't imagine a world where someone like Crockett might command the room. Yet arrogance has a way of inviting its own undoing. The very polish that made Bondi a media star also made her predictable. Her law and order mantra rang hollow against a backdrop of selective justice. Her calls for civility sounded thin next to her own sharp-tongued attacks. Each contradiction was a crack in the facade, invisible to those dazzled by the spotlight but glaring to anyone willing to look closer. Crockett, it turned out, had been looking very closely. In the days leading to the confrontation, Bondi carried herself as though the outcome was preordained. She entered the chamber certain that her reputation, years of television appearances, legal victories, and political connections would keep her untouchable. She believed that a freshman representative, no matter how articulate, could not pierce the armor she had spent a career forging. But reputation can be a fragile shield when met with truth sharpened by preparation. And just when Pam Bondi thought her carefully built image would protect her from any real challenge, a freshman congresswoman shattered it all. Long before Jasmine Crockett sat beneath the blinding lights of a Capitol Hill hearing room, she was a daughter of grit and possibility. Born and raised in the beating heart of Texas, Crockett grew up in a household where hard work wasn't a slogan, it was survival. Her parents weren't political insiders or wealthy donors. They were everyday Americans who knew the sting of discrimination and the quiet dignity of perseverance. Dinner table conversations weren't about climbing ladders of power, they were about standing tall when the world tried to bend you low. From her earliest days, Crockett absorbed the lesson that progress is never handed down, it's carved out by those willing to show up. In high school, she organized volunteer drives for immigrant families struggling to navigate a system designed to shut them out. While other kids chased popularity, she chased justice, helping translate for parents who feared deportation and tutoring children whose futures were already under siege. Friends recall that even then, Jasmine carried herself with a calm that felt older than her years, a steadiness that made people believe she could weather any storm. Law school sharpened that instinct into a mission. While classmates chased lucrative firm offers, Crockett chose the relentless grind of public defense. She walked into overcrowded jails and underfunded courtrooms determined to give voice to the voiceless. There were nights she slept in her car after marathon days in court, mornings when the weight of stacked odds felt crushing. But every acquittal, every life redirected away from a system that devoured the poor and the marginalized, fueled her conviction. She understood that the law was more than statutes and filings, it was a battlefield where the powerless needed fearless champions. Her rise through Texas politics was anything but smooth. She ran for local office without the blessing of party elites, knocking on doors until her knuckles ached, speaking at church basements and community centers where voters had grown used to broken promises. Time and again, she faced opponents with deeper pockets and better connections. Time and again, she refused to bow. If they don't open the door, she would tell volunteers, we build our own. Her victories were narrow, hard-fought, and unmistakably hers. Each campaign became a masterclass in grassroots organizing powered by immigrants, single mothers, students, and workers who saw in her a reflection of their own fight. But Crockett's path wasn't just about winning elections, it was about surviving the bruises that come with challenging entrenched power. She endured smear campaigns that twisted her words and questioned her loyalty to America. She faced online harassment designed to silence her with fear. She watched colleagues compromise values for convenience and vowed she never would. Through it all, she cultivated a calm that wasn't weakness but strategy. Every insult was a test of composure. Every ambush was an opportunity to prove that dignity could be sharper than any attack. Her policies mirrored the communities that lifted her. She championed immigrant-friendly reforms, affordable health care, and protections for workers left behind by corporate greed. When federal raids tore families apart, she stood outside detention centers demanding accountability. When state legislatures passed laws designed to suppress votes, she organized caravans to register citizens anyway. She didn't just speak about equity, she lived it, shoulder to shoulder with those who had the least to lose and the most to gain. In neighborhoods where politicians rarely lingered, Jasmine Crockett showed up again and again, not with cameras but with listening ears and detailed plans. Those years of relentless advocacy forged more than a political resume. They forged a woman immune to intimidation. When opponents tried to shout her down, she learned to pause, let the noise burn itself out, and answer with facts that cut cleaner than anger ever could. That composure became her signature, a quiet steel that unsettled bullies and comforted allies. Supporters began to call her the calm storm. A leader whose serenity masked the force of a hurricane. It was this journey every long night, every courthouse fight, every community meeting in cramped apartments that brought Crockett to that Capitol Hill chamber. She carried not just her own ambitions, but the hopes of millions who had been told to wait their turn, to stay silent, to be grateful for scraps. Immigrant mothers who feared the knock of enforcement agents. Young black girls who watched the news and wondered if their voices mattered. Workers juggling 3 jobs while politicians debated their worth. All of them were with her in that moment, invisible but undeniable, a living shield against the dismissiveness she faced. By the time Pam Bondi leaned forward with a cutting "stop talking," Crockett's calm wasn't an act. It was the product of a lifetime spent standing in rooms where power tried to drown out truth. Every protest she attended, every case she argued, every voter she persuaded had honed her ability to meet arrogance with poise. What looked effortless was in fact hard-won discipline, a blade sharpened by years of battle. Every hard-won victory, every sleepless night, every moment of unshakable grace had prepared her for this exact confrontation. And as the chamber held its breath, Jasmine Crockett prepared to wield that blade in a single sentence that would echo far beyond the walls of Congress. The hearing chamber, already humming with nervous energy, seemed to contract as Pam Bondi leaned forward again, her voice sharp enough to slice through the murmur of staffers and the faint whir of camera equipment. "Representative Crockett," she said, emphasizing the title like a taunt, "this is not a campaign rally. Your opinions are not facts. Kindly stop talking and let the adults handle the serious issues at hand." Gasps rippled through the room, small, involuntary sounds that betrayed the audience's shock at the brazenness of the remark. Aides along the back wall exchanged uneasy glances. Journalists clutched their pens like they might break in two. Bondi's words were delivered with the polished confidence of someone long accustomed to getting the last word. To her, this was an exercise in dominance, a public scolding meant to shrink a rising star back into the shadows. But Jasmine Crockett didn't shrink. She didn't even flinch. She sat upright, shoulders squared, eyes steady, her face a portrait of composed resolve. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but resonant, each syllable deliberate. "With respect, Madam Chair," she began, "facts aren't determined by who shouts the loudest. And the people I represent deserve a full accounting of the truth." A fresh wave of murmurs washed over the gallery. Cameras pivoted toward Bondi, hungry to capture her reaction. Bondi forced a smile, the kind that barely masked irritation. "Truth," she countered, her tone dipping into mockery. "The truth is that you're grandstanding, wasting valuable time while this committee tries to deal with real legislation. You've brought nothing but noise and social media theatrics." Again, the audible reaction was instantaneous, a sharp intake of collective breath, a few scattered claps quickly hushed by security. Bondi, sensing momentum, pressed harder. "Frankly," she said, voice rising, "you're out of your depth. This isn't a courthouse sideshow. It's Congress. Know your place." The phrase hung in the air like a live wire. Know your place. The dog whistle was unmistakable. A chill swept through the room, as if everyone understood that the exchange had shifted from procedural sparring to something far more visceral. Even some of Bondi's own allies stiffened, their faces betraying the discomfort of a line crossed. Crockett's response came with the precision of a practiced surgeon. She waited a beat long enough for the tension to peak, long enough for every camera light to sharpen on her face. "My place," she said calmly, "is right here. Elected by the people of Texas to hold this government accountable. My place is to speak for those who are too often silenced. And no amount of interruption will change that." The room erupted in a chorus of low, startled exclamations. Staffers who moments earlier had kept their eyes glued to notepads now looked up, drawn into the gravity of the moment. Bondi's eyes narrowed, her practiced poise starting to show cracks. "Representative," she said, her voice quickening, "this is my floor, and I will not tolerate disrespect." "With respect," Crockett interjected smoothly, never raising her voice, "the floor belongs to the American people. I'm merely borrowing it on their behalf." The comeback landed like a carefully aimed arrow. Aides in the gallery couldn't suppress their reactions, a stifled laugh here, a wide-eyed glance there. Even the stenographer paused for a fraction of a second, fingers hovering above the keys as though acknowledging the weight of the words. Bondi opened her mouth to fire back, but for the first time, she hesitated. The sharpness of her earlier barbs had dulled against Crockett's unyielding calm. The contrast was impossible to miss, one woman straining to dominate the room through volume, the other commanding it through quiet conviction. Reporters leaned forward, sensing the climax of an exchange that had already eclipsed the day's agenda. Phones lit up across the chamber as aides live texted updates to editors and allies. Social media notifications pinged in rapid succession, though none inside the room dared look away. The tension thickened to a near tangible weight, every second stretching longer than the last. Bondi shifted in her seat, searching for a new angle of attack. Crockett remained motionless, the embodiment of deliberate restraint. And then silence. A collective, breathless pause settled over the hearing room, as if the air itself recognized that the balance of power had shifted. Viewers watching the live stream held their breath. No one knew it yet, but the next sentence to leave Jasmine Crockett's lips would not only upend the hearing, it would set the internet ablaze. The silence stretched until it felt alive, an electric hush that made every breath sound deafening. Cameras zoomed in, lenses narrowing on Jasmine Crockett's face as though the entire room understood that something irreversible was about to unfold. She inhaled slowly, her posture unshaken, her gaze steady on Pam Bondi. And then, in a voice no louder than a conversation but carrying the weight of an earthquake, she began. "Madam Chair," Crockett said, the respectful preface landing like the calm before a storm, "you've reminded us repeatedly that this committee exists to protect the truth. So let's protect it." The first sentence was measured, almost gentle, but its subtext snapped like a hidden wire. Bondi blinked, her polished smile stiffening as if she'd felt the room tilt. Reporters leaned forward, pens suspended. Crockett continued. Each word a deliberate strike. "You've accused me of noise," she said, "but silence has never served the people who sent me here. Silence has never fed a child, never saved a home, never secured a vote. And silence will not protect this country from leaders who confuse power with righteousness." The chamber shifted, a ripple of low murmurs, the creak of chairs as listeners unconsciously leaned closer. Bondi's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. The contrast between Crockett's calm delivery and the explosive content of her words created a tension so sharp it was almost audible. Crockett reached for a folder, sliding it across the table with a composure that made the gesture feel monumental. "Since we're discussing facts," she said, "let's look at a few." She opened the folder with surgical precision, revealing a series of printed documents. Voting records, committee transcripts, and public statements, each one highlighting how this body has spoken of justice but acted in contradiction to it. The room stilled again. Bondi's practiced poise faltered, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face as Crockett read from the first sheet. "On March 12, you argued that no federal protections were needed for voting rights because, quote, the system works as is. Yet in the same week, you praised efforts to purge voter rolls in states where turnout threatened your party's dominance." A gasp escaped from somewhere in the gallery. Crockett didn't pause. "You call for law and order," she continued, "but dismiss investigations into abuses of power when those abuses served your allies. You preach about decorum while silencing the voices of women and minorities who dare to question you." Each example landed like a quiet detonation, the kind that doesn't rattle the walls but rearranges the ground beneath them. Bondi's jaw tightened. Her eyes darted toward her aides, but no lifeline appeared. And then Crockett delivered the line that would ignite 1,000 retweets. If defending democracy is noise, Madam Chair, then I will be the loudest echo this chamber has ever heard. The gallery erupted. Not in cheers security would have quelled that, but in a cascade of startled murmurs and suppressed applause, the sound of a crowd struggling to contain its awe. Bondi tried to interject. Representative, this is highly irregular. Crockett didn't raise her voice, she simply kept speaking, the steady rhythm of her words drowning out Bondi's attempt to regain control. Irregular, she said, is a country where truth is treated as interruption. Irregular is expecting deference from the very people whose lives your policies endanger. Irregular is mistaking authority for immunity. The words hung in the air like a chime struck in a cathedral, pure, resonant, impossible to ignore. Bondi's face betrayed the smallest crack, a tightening around the eyes, a swallow that arrived a beat too late. Outside the chamber, the digital world caught fire. Phones vibrated in the pockets of aides and journalists as hashtags began to climb the trending lists. Hashtag CrockettCom, hashtag Bondi shutdown, hashtag Echo of Truth. Clips of the exchange, barely seconds old, started ricocheting across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. A viral storm was forming in real time. Back in the room, Crockett pressed on, her voice unshaken. This is not about you or me, she said, her eyes never leaving Bondi's. It's about every worker, every parent, every dreamer who refuses to be told to know their place. My place is here. And I will not yield it to arrogance disguised as order. A collective shiver coursed through the chamber. Even those inclined to dismiss her found themselves silent, caught in the gravitational pull of a truth too precise to deny. Bondi opened her mouth again, but no words came. The cameras captured the moment. Pam Bondi, famed for her on-air ferocity, frozen in uncharacteristic stillness. Crockett closed the folder and folded her hands, the picture of composed finality. She had said everything necessary and nothing more. The quiet confidence in her posture was more devastating than any shouted insult. Reporters began typing furiously, their screens lighting up with headlines that practically wrote themselves. Crockett flips the scripture, calm dismantles chaos. Bondi outclassed on live camera. Bondi shifted in her seat, the practiced veneer of control slipping like a mask in the heat. For once, she seemed unsure whether to respond, retreat, or simply endure. The silence that followed Crockett's final words was not mere absence of sound, it was judgment, heavy and unanimous. Across the nation, social media feeds exploded with disbelief and admiration. One user tweeted, "I just witnessed history." Jasmine Crockett didn't just clap back, she rewrote the rules of the game. Another posted a looping clip of Bondi's stunned expression with the caption, "When arrogance meets receipts." Memes flooded timelines within minutes, Crockett's calm face superimposed over storm clouds, captions like "the eye of the hurricane." Inside the chamber, the chair finally struck the gavel to regain order, but the symbolic victory was already sealed. Crockett sat motionless, a faint, knowing smile touching the corner of her lips. Bondi stared down at her papers, the weight of the exchange settling like a verdict no gavel could overturn. For the audience watching live and for millions who would soon watch on their phones, laptops, and TV screens, the message was unmistakable. Power did not belong to the loudest voice. It belonged to the one who could remain still, sharpened by truth, until the silence itself became a weapon. Bondi adjusted her microphone, finally managing a brittle, "Representative, your time has expired." Crockett replied with a simple nod, her calm gaze never wavering. No triumphant grin, no dramatic flourish, just quiet certainty. And somehow, that restraint cut deeper than any final jab. The gavel struck again, echoing through the chamber like a reluctant admission of defeat. In that moment, every camera, every phone, every witness knew they had seen more than a debate. They had seen a transfer of power not in votes or titles, but in moral authority. And as the hearing moved awkwardly to its next agenda item, the real show was already unfolding beyond those marble walls. Tweets stacked into trending lists, hashtags surged into millions of impressions, and news alerts buzzed across the country. Pam Bondi had come to silence a rising voice. Instead, she had amplified it for the world to hear. Within minutes of the gavel's reluctant final strike, the chamber's marble walls became little more than background noise for the storm erupting beyond them. Phones lit up like a city skyline at midnight, vibrating in the pockets of reporters, aides, and even security officers who couldn't resist sneaking a glance. The first hashtag to break containment was #CrockettCalm. Followed quickly by #Bondi Shutdown and the poetic #Echo of Truth. Each tag rose with meteoric speed, propelled by users who could barely type fast enough to keep pace with the unfolding spectacle. Clips of the exchange, Crockett's steady gaze, Bondi's frozen expression began circulating within seconds. On Twitter, a looping 8-second video of Crockett calmly delivering her loudest echo line racked up 500,000 views in under 10 minutes. TikTok stitched the moment into everything from dance memes to heartfelt monologues about democracy. Instagram feeds filled with side-by-side stills, Bondi mid-shout, Crockett mid-silence, the contrast as striking as a painting. Commentators scrambled to get ahead of the wave. Cable news anchors interrupted scheduled segments to run the footage, some visibly stunned, others barely suppressing smiles. Progressive hosts called it a masterclass in composure under fire. Conservative pundits tried to downplay the encounter as political theater, but even they couldn't ignore the ferocity of the public response. "This isn't just about one hearing," admitted a normally combative commentator. "It's about who gets to speak and who gets told to shut up in American politics." Celebrities added fuel to the fire. Actor Kerry Washington tweeted, "Representative Crockett just gave every young girl watching a blueprint for power. Calm is strength." Singer John Legend posted a clip with the caption, "Receipts speak louder than rage." Late-night hosts teased emergency monologues for that evening, promising to replay the calm clapback heard around the country. Meanwhile, inside Republican war rooms, the mood was anything but celebratory. Staffers for Pam Bondi reportedly huddled in back corridors, phones buzzing with frantic messages from party strategists. "We need a counter-narrative by sundown," one aide was overheard saying, his voice sharp with urgency. Draft statements circulated claims that the clip was taken out of context, accusations of grandstanding, vague appeals to decorum, but nothing stuck. Every attempt to reframe the exchange only amplified the very moment they were desperate to contain. Political analysts began debating the deeper implications. Was this the start of a new era in congressional discourse, where calm precision could pierce partisan noise? Could Crockett's performance galvanize young voters disillusioned by politics as usual? On MSNBC, one panelist called it a cultural reset, arguing that Crockett's demeanor offered a new template for resistance, one rooted not in volume, but in unassailable truth. Everyday Americans joined the conversation with their own stories. Teachers shared how they planned to play the clip in civics classes. Parents wrote about watching with their children and feeling, perhaps for the first time in years, that politics could inspire rather than exhaust. One viral tweet read, "My daughter just told me she wants to be Jasmine Crockett when she grows up. Tonight feels different." Another user, a retired veteran, posted, "That young woman fought for all of us in that room. That's the America I served for." Even late-night comedians found themselves struggling to exaggerate what reality had already delivered. "How do you top perfection?" joked one host, before replaying Crockett's calm retort to a roaring studio audience. Memes flooded every corner of the internet, Crockett's serene face photoshopped onto a hurricane's eye. Captions like "the calm before the truth." Another showed Bondi mid-interruption with the words "volume is not equal to victory." But amid the humor and hashtags, a more serious current flowed. Commentators noted how the moment crystallized broader tensions heading into the 2025 election season. Bondi's outburst, they argued, symbolized a Republican strategy of silencing progressive voices, especially women of color, while Crockett's composed defiance embodied a rising coalition unwilling to be muted. What played out in those few minutes wasn't merely a skirmish between two politicians, it was a clash of eras, a preview of battles yet to come. By nightfall, the narrative had expanded beyond Crockett and Bondi. Editorials described the confrontation as a parable of power and poise. Newspapers from New York to Los Angeles ran front-page stories with headlines like "Calm Destroys Chaos" and "The Echo That Could Shape 2025." International outlets picked it up too, framing it as evidence of America's internal reckoning with race, gender, and democratic values. Inside Jasmine Crockett's Dallas district office, staffers watched the coverage with a mix of exhilaration and quiet resolve. They knew the memes would eventually fade, but the impact would linger. Donations to grassroots campaigns surged overnight. Volunteers signed up in droves, citing Crockett's performance as their inspiration. "She didn't just speak for herself," one supporter said. "She spoke for every one of us who's ever been told to sit down and be quiet." Pam Bondi's team released a carefully worded statement just before midnight, blaming media sensationalism and accusing Crockett of grandstanding. But the damage was already done. Screens across the nation were still replaying the clip, each view reinforcing a new hierarchy of influence. The next morning's polls showed a measurable bump in Crockett's national recognition and a corresponding dip in Bondi's favorability. What began as a heated committee hearing had become something far more potent. It was no longer about a single exchange or even a single politician. It was about the shifting gravitational pull of American politics, where moral clarity could outshine seniority, and a calm, deliberate voice could command the attention of a restless nation. This was more than a meme. It was a pivot point, a spark that hinted at the political storms of 2025, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with a shout, but with an unshakable whisper. As the headlines ricocheted across the nation and the hashtags settled into their own kind of digital permanence, Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped forward not for another victory lap, but for something far more enduring. When she finally addressed the cameras after the hearing, there was no gloating in her tone, no hint of triumphal swagger. Instead, she spoke with the steady warmth of someone who understood that this moment was never about scoring points. "It's not about me," she began, her voice carrying the calm authority that had stunned the chamber hours earlier. "It's about the right of every American to be heard, no matter who tries to silence them." Her words reframed the clash in a way that transcended the spectacle. To Jasmine, Pam Bondi's outburst wasn't just a personal insult, it was a symbol of how ego can drown out truth when left unchecked. Crockett drew a clear line between the noise of political theater and the quiet, immovable force of dignity. "Ego shouts," she said, "but dignity endures. Theatrics fade, but truth is timeless. Our democracy only works when courage speaks louder than fear." In that instant, the narrative shifted from a viral confrontation to a meditation on what America could still be. She reminded the audience that her calm reply was forged through years of struggle, not sudden inspiration. Every late-night town hall, every courtroom battle on behalf of marginalized families, every insult she'd swallowed while fighting for immigrant rights, each had sharpened the composure that disarmed Bondi's aggression. "Courage isn't built in a day," she told a reporter afterward. "It's built in every moment you choose to keep going when the world tells you to sit down." Her message resonated because it was more than rhetoric, it was a lived experience. Viewers across the country felt the charge. Teachers played her remarks in classrooms, urging students to see that civic courage doesn't require a title or a podium. Parents shared the clip with children as proof that calm conviction can defeat bluster. Social feeds filled with personal reflections, stories of workers who had stood up to unfair bosses, immigrants who refused to hide their identities, neighbors who defended one another against prejudice. Jasmine's composure became a mirror in which millions saw their own quiet battles for respect and justice. Commentators noted that the confrontation exposed a deeper truth about America's crossroads. As the nation hurtled toward the 2025 elections, the temptation of party games and performative outrage threatened to drown out substantive debate. But Crockett's example cut through the noise. She showed that real power isn't measured by who can yell the loudest or dominate a headline cycle. It lives in the willingness to stand, steady and unflinching, for values that outlast any election. "America's future depends on more than policy," one columnist wrote. "It depends on the moral courage to speak when others demand silence." Even some who didn't share her politics admitted respect. A conservative podcast host tweeted, "You don't have to agree with Representative Crockett to admire her grace." That's leadership. In a polarized era where applause rarely crosses party lines, such acknowledgments underscored the universal appeal of dignity over ego. Crockett had managed to remind a weary country that truth and respect are not partisan ideals, they are the bedrock of democracy itself. Before leaving the Capitol that night, Jasmine paused for a final statement that captured the essence of the day. "This isn't just my fight," she said softly, as reporters leaned in. "It's our fight. Every time you choose dignity over ego, every time you tell the truth when it would be easier to stay silent, you strengthen the fabric of this nation." That's how we move forward, one courageous voice at a time. The chamber where Bondi once shouted now stood silent, but Crockett's message reverberated far beyond those marble walls. It echoed in living rooms, classrooms, and city streets, urging Americans to believe in their own power to confront injustice. The lesson was clear and unmistakable: entrenched power can be pierced not by fury, but by the unyielding clarity of truth. And in that quiet certainty, a restless nation found a reason to hope. The hearing may have ended, but the echo of that single exchange, Pam Bondi shouted "Stop talking," met with Jasmine Crockett's poised reply, continues to reverberate across the nation. What began as a heated moment inside a congressional chamber has become a rallying point for millions who believe dignity must always rise above ego. You watched it unfold, the shout meant to silence, the calm that refused to bend, and the thunderous reaction that followed. That's more than a viral clip, it's a blueprint for courage. This is where you come in. Democracy is not a spectator sport, and moments like this only matter if we carry their lessons beyond the screen. Share this story with someone who needs to see the power of a steady voice. Leave a comment about the last time you witnessed truth cut through chaos. Subscribe and stay connected, because the next confrontation, the next chance to stand for what's right, could happen tomorrow, and you deserve to be part of it. Let this video be more than entertainment. Let it be a reminder that your voice, your vote, and your courage matter as much as any headline. When you speak up, when you refuse to be drowned out, you strengthen the very fabric of this country. Because when one voice speaks truth, the whole room listens.